Good day or good evening. I'm Dick Fisher. My co-host Ken Miller and I would like to welcome you to Creation, Genesis, and Origins. In southern Mesopotamia, beginning around 2600 to 2500 BC, Semites from the north migrated towards Sumerian cities, adapting to the local lifestyle over time. This is from Jaquetta Hawkes. Semites who had adopted Sumerian culture and adapted cuneiform to the writing of their own language are known as Akkadians. The mingling of the two peoples and their traditions produced a vigorous civilization, but it was not long before the Semites were to become the dominant partners. The middle of the third millennium was tumultuous in Sumer. Fortress cities fought for supremacy against each other, with first one and then another, vying for and gaining control, only to lose it again in yet another battle. Umma and Lagash were two cities frequently in opposition and engaged one another in conflict repeatedly. Around 2450 BC, a monument was raised in Lagash, heralding the triumph of King Inutatum over the Ummans.
At about 2375 BC, Lugal-Zagizi of Umma exacted revenge and sacked the city of Lagash, burning their temples. The heady aroma of victory was not to endure, as the forces of Lugal-Zagizi were crushed at Nippur by a former cupbearer to the king, Sargon the Great, bringing to power a new ruler, a Semite, over Sumer and Akkad.
Sargon's origins are intriguing. Legend has it that a Semite woman found herself embarrassingly with child. After birth, baby Sargon was placed in a reed basket, waterproofed with pitch, and set adrift Moses style upon the headwaters of the Euphrates. The basket drifted downstream was found by a Sumerian farmer who reared little Sargon in his home.
A short testimony from Sargon has been pieced together from two incomplete Neo-Assyrian tablets and one Neo-Babylonian fragment. It begins, "Sargon the mighty king, king of Akkad am I." Sargon goes on to tell of his humble birth.
From a broken tablet, the following are 4 lines of the 32-line text. "And for 4, and we don't know how many years, I exercised kingship. The black-headed people I ruled, I governed. Whatever king may come up after me, let him rule. Let him govern the black-headed people." Building on what we have learned, these words from the Semite king imply that he was ruling over a people whose racial characteristics were different from his own people. Clearly, it refers to the Sumerians.
Sargon came from Nimrod's city of Akkad. Starting his career as cupbearer to the king of Kish, Sargon launched an effective military campaign and, after crushing Lugal-Zagizi's army, began his rule.
Archaeologist Andre Perot wrote, "The Sumerian kingdom of Lugal-Zagizi soon fell entirely into the hands of Sargon, whose full title proudly proclaimed him to be lord and master of the 4 quarters of the world, namely, Amaru to the west, Subartu to the north, Sumer and Akkad to the south, and Elam to the east."
The Sargonate period, also called the Akkadian period of Mesopotamian history, lasted about 150 years and saw 5 kings come to power. The great Sargon ruled from 2371 to 2316 BC.
His grandson, Naram-Sin, was 4th in line of succession and reigned from 2291 to 2255 BC. All of the city-states of Mesopotamia came under his rule. However, the Semitic Akkadians found out what subsequent empires throughout history have learned. Power is easier to grasp than maintain. Also, something incredibly stupid happened. Naram-Sin, fearing a revolt from within, ordered the fortress city walls of each city brought down brick by brick, which left them vulnerable to attack. Continual raids from without and revolts from within weakened the Akkadian hegemony until the nomadic Gutians toppled the Sargonid dynasty around 2200 BC. A period of turmoil followed the Gutian victory. This is a quote from Ancient Civilizations. The arrival of the Guti and their conquest of the Akkadians around 2200 BC ushered in a period of anarchy. The Sumerian king list asks, who was king? Who was not king? Recording 21 kings in a period of 91 years. Utuligal became king of Uruk about 2120 BC. His empire lasted 7 years, and he suffered defeat at the hands of Ur-Nammu, governor of Ur. Subsequently, Ur-Nammu was crowned king of Ur and further took on the title of king of Sumer and Akkad. He began the third dynasty of Ur, which lasted from 2112 to nearly 2000 BC. Sumerian political authority over the region ended with the capture of Ibbi-Sin, the last of the third dynasty of Ur. For 200 years thereafter, Mesopotamia struggled with small, protective, city-state kingdoms, such as Ashur and Eshnunna to the north, and Essene and Larsa in Sumer. As to the Sumerian people, in matters of culture and religion, however, they continued to play a leading role for many centuries, while as an ethnic group, they were slowly absorbed into their Semitic environment. We don't know when this process of absorption was completed.
After the dispersing, settling, and probably conquering by the tribal descendants of Noah's 3 sons, roughly at the time of Sargon, an incident took place in the plain of Shinar that caused and still causes confusion today. At the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11:1 says, "And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech."
The King James translators arrived at Genesis 11 with the same preconceptions they had throughout the early chapters of Genesis. Just as translators and interpreters who have followed, they labored under the popular misconception that all mankind descended from Adam, and all but Noah and his immediate family drowned in a worldwide flood. When they reached this verse, they thought the population of the entire world was concentrated at Shinar and spoke one common language. Had they known the history of the ancient Near East, they could have selected words more accommodating to the facts as we know them today. The true confusion of tongues is a translation of Hebrew into English. Yet again, Eretz is translated earth, although in the next verse the same word is rendered as the land of Shinar. If the Hebrew Eretz is land and Saphah is translated literally as lip rather than the broader word language, we would read the text as follows: "And the whole land was of one lip and one speech."
We know the Sumerians and Akkadians spoke unrelated languages, and if we assume the writer of Genesis was at least as knowledgeable as we are, then we should conclude that he meant to convey something else. What was it?
Many languages originated all over the world and were being spoken by 2500 BC. The difficulty translators had was in putting that verse into a proper context, and the context they thought applied was erroneous. Let's put that sentence into a context that would make sense. Let's say you lived in Canada and we hadn't spoken in years. Then September 11, 2001 happens. Over and over you have seen the images of the planes flying into the World Trade Center towers in New York, and the towers collapse. And the next day I call you and say, "My Lord, the whole land is of one lip and one speech." What would you think I meant in that context?
I wouldn't think you were calling me to say everyone in America was speaking English. Probably it would be about what happened. Everyone was talking about it.
Exactly. And that is what is going on here. But Bible translators didn't know what was going on. Only a student of history would know. This was during the period of ziggurat building in Mesopotamia. After the Great Flood had obliterated the Adamite population and impacted the Sumerians to some degree, somebody came up with a good idea, and each city built mud brick platforms in the center of their cities as a means to survive periodic floods. Over the years, these simple platforms were built upon and functioned as temples where they could worship their city gods. These are the famous ziggurats, the remains of which can still be seen today as crumbling mounds of mud bricks. After the flood, platforms constructed in the Mesopotamian cities began to grow and take on religious connotations. Mud brick mounds that had originally been constructed to survive floods became ziggurats adorned with temples of worship, the dwelling places of the gods. And temples were constructed dedicated to whatever god was protecting each individual city.